In the video today, we're answering a viewer question because Alex K asks us, is it true that sommeliers can't tell the difference between expensive and cheap wines? And this video is rather appropriately brought to you by Bright Cellars. Bright Cellars send you wine, and for me that would be enough of a pitch. I love wine, but what is really clever is they use technology to suggest wines that are based on your own taste. You take a quiz and then you receive a box, and then each box you give some feedback and you get better and better wines that are more suited to your tastes. Our viewers can get half price on their first box at brightcellars.com/brainfood. So, having a seasoned tongue that can detect the subtle differences between different kinds of adult grape juice is certainly a sign of class. In fact, the go-to Hollywood trope for showing that a character is refined is to give them a penchant for expensive wines. Even Hannibal Lecter, one of the most terrifying and cultured characters in film history, has a soft spot for Chianti. But the question at hand today is, can even the professional wine connoisseurs actually tell the difference between a Chateau Cheval Blanc 1943 and a Bota Box Chardonnay? To begin with, it's important to understand what a person has to go through to acquire the label of wine expert, otherwise known as sommelier. It turns out this varies considerably from absolutely no official required training at all, the label is technically originally a job title, to an extreme amount, as in the case of master sommeliers, of which there have been less than 300 people who have managed to achieve that certification in a little over half a century since the title started being granted. This makes it one of the most exclusive professional certifications in the world. As to the vastly more common distinction of sommelier, some who achieve this certification are simply wine enthusiasts wanting to take their hobby to the next level. Others are those working in the restaurant service industry who may have even got that title via working their way up from a simple waiter at a wine bar and learning on the job. That said, as sommelier Dustin Wilson notes, by forcing oneself to study hard for a long period of time, certification offers young sommeliers the opportunity to gain the context they need to understand wine much faster than they would if they simply relied on the dining room floor as their classroom. So this brings us to more formal certification. How rigorous a given course for certification is varies from institution to institution that offer these courses, but in general, sommeliers must be able to identify with reasonable accuracy random types of wine by taste, sight, and smell. They also have to answer various questions about winemaking, the various regions of the world that are major wine producers, and what makes wine from them different than wines that are produced elsewhere. They must also have extensive knowledge of very specific food pairings, as well as demonstrate little things like the best technique for how to open a bottle of wine and pour, which, while simple for those working in the industry, nonetheless often trips up the hobbyist attempting to get that certification. On that note, while actual formal training to get such a certification may only take dozens of hours, leading up to passing a given program's tests, a person generally needs extensive experience with all things wine, whether as a long-time hobby or experience within the industry. As you might have gathered from all of this, all sommeliers are not created equal. Some may be immensely knowledgeable and skilled at judging various wines, while others might be a little better than your wine enthusiast cousin called Jill. This all brings us to the elite of the elite, master sommeliers. These are the Yodas of the wine world, and it's no coincidence that the average salary for one eclipses that of mere mortal sommeliers. For your reference, a run-of-the-mill, lowly, just starting out sommelier might make as little as in the $40,000 a year range, whereas someone who has passed the tests to become an advanced sommelier earns around $78,000 a year on average. The master sommeliers, on the other hand, typically make about $150,000 per year and can usually be found working at some of the world's finest restaurants. The testing to become a master sommelier is vastly more rigorous, and those invited to test, and yes, it's invite only, must have first passed the introductory exam, then the certified exam, and then the advanced sommelier's exam. Those who pursue this course also tend to have previously had extensive backgrounds in the culinary arts and typically have many years of experience working as a sommelier in some wine-serving establishments. Once they've distinguished themselves enough in the field, they may then be invited to take the tests to become a master sommelier. From here, they are given 3 years to pass 3 tests, including a practical restaurant service section, a verbal examination covering all things wine related to incredible depth, from history to grape cultivation in various regions to various winemaking methods, and finally the most difficult test of all is the taste test. In this, they are given 6 random wines chosen from the thousands produced in the world. In 25 minutes, they must correctly identify not just what region of the world each one comes from, but also the exact year the grapes were harvested. Each candidate is allowed to take each test up to 6 times in the 3-year span, but even then, as you might expect from so few ever having achieved this certification, many fail despite already being considered advanced wine experts before even attempting the tests. Now, given all of this, surely the elite wine professionals must be able to tell the difference between random expensive and random cheap wines, right? Well, yes, the elite of the elite absolutely can, but well, no, they can't at all, actually. So what do I mean and what's going on here? Well, there are several factors that go into this. First, there's the business side, with a variety of factors that go into what makes something an expensive or a cheap wine. This goes far beyond just taste. Making such distinctions smaller than ever, winemaking has become a huge business on a scale and with scientific rigor that has never been seen in the industry before. This is all in an effort to create the best wines for as cheaply as possible. As journalist and sommelier Bianca Bosca notes, one of the things that I did was go into this wine conglomerate, Treasury Wine Estates, that produces millions of bottles of wine per year. People are there developing wine the way flavor scientists develop the new Oreos or Doritos flavor. Noteworthy here is that the scientists extensively use sommeliers to help tweak their mass-produced wines to be as high quality as possible, even for the experts. They further add a variety of things to the wine, not unlike adding ingredients to any beverage, to tweak just about every facet of it until they come up with an end product that they think will maximally appeal to consumers. As a result, even disregarding business elements affecting price beyond taste, the gap between inexpensive wines and the finest has closed considerably in recent decades. Further, there are more varieties of wine today to enjoy than there ever have been before. All of this makes it an effort in futility for even a master sommelier to be able to consistently identify one wine as one that was probably ultra expensive versus more of a middle-of-the-road variety of the same type of wine. Partially as a result of this, studies have shown that while the public can identify the difference between the cheapest of wines at a couple of dollars a bottle and, say, a $20 or $30 bottle, as soon as you start to go much above that, we mere mortals tend to differentiate the two with about the same accuracy as you'd expect in predicting the results of a coin flip. That said, it turns out there is actually a slight and very interesting correlation. In one study with over 6,000 tasters, comprising about 12% sommeliers and the rest the general public, trying to determine if people like expensive wines more than cheap ones, it turned out that we find the correlation between price and overall rating is small and negative, suggesting that individuals, on average, enjoy more expensive wines slightly less. For individuals with wine training, however, we find indications of a positive relationship between price and enjoyment. Our results indicate that both the prices of wine and wine recommendations by experts may be poor guides for non-expert wine consumers. Thus, similar to music or really any field, those who are experts do seem to enjoy the finer, more complex versions. On the other side, there is the general public who seem to prefer listening to whatever the latest is from Taylor Swift. Or as one music professor, the co-author of this piece once had, was fond of saying with respect to pop music versus things like a symphony, cotton candy tastes great, but you can only eat so much of it before you start to get sick of it and start craving a high-quality steak dinner. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, well, sure, it's easy to be fooled by the business side of things when talking price, but what about all those studies that show wine experts can't even tell white wine from red in blind taste tests? Well, it turns out there's a lot more going on with it than the clickbait headlines tend to indicate. This should be fairly obvious from the fact that master sommeliers are able to pass the test that they do in the first place, which would be impossible if their skills were really as bad as people say they are. As fellow YouTuber Wheezy Waiter points out in his aptly titled song, "A headline's not an article, a headline is not an article." You see, as ever, our monkey brains are gonna monkey brain. We humans are just really, really easy to trick, especially when it comes to our senses. Ever eaten something minty and then drank a room temperature glass of water? Congratulations, you've just tricked your body into thinking you were drinking ice cold water because methanol binds with cold sensitive receptors that make these much more sensitive than normal, so they trigger more easily and you feel a cold sensation even though everything is the same temperature as before. So everything from what you ate or drank before to sensing the environment you're currently in to even your level of fatigue can influence the way you perceive the taste of something. On top of physical things like that, there's your expectations, which can be absurdly easily influenced, especially when it comes to taste. So now let's talk about wine. Contained within the grape juice are many dozens of esters and aldehydes, sugars, minerals, organic acids, etc., etc. This cocktail all derives from the grapes, processes of the yeast as it works its magic, and what the wine is processed and stored in during its journey from plant to your belly. This all creates the colors, smells, and tastes which combine to form the flavor you perceive when you ingest the wine. To give you an idea of the scope of things here, consider that over 400 compounds that influence the scent alone have been identified in wine. On that note, temperature by itself can make a huge difference to taste, among other reasons because of how this can affect the boiling point and thus smell, and in turn taste, of some of these compounds in the wine. As wine enthusiast David Derbyshire notes, serve a New World Chardonnay too cold and you only taste the overpowering oak. Serve a red too warm and the heady boozy qualities will be overpowering. As for the wine experts, while they may have honed their skills with sometimes thousands of hours of study into all things wine, they still have the same monkey brain as the rest of us. Case in point, we have wine expert and journalist Katie Kelly Bell, who was traveling with a fellow group of wine connoisseurs. While at Waters Vineyard in Washington state, the owner poured everyone 2 glasses of white wine and asked them to identify which type they were. Bell sums up, "We swirled, we sniffed, we wrinkled our brows in contemplation, some of us nodding with assurance. I took notes, finding the first white to be more floral and elegant than the second. Drawing on my years and years, there have been too many, of tasting, studying, and observation, I swiftly concluded that the first was an unoaked Chardonnay and the second was a Sauvignon Blanc. Easy peasy. Much to my mortification, I was dead wrong, as was everyone else in the room. The proprietor chuckled and informed his room that the wines were actually the same wine. One was just warmer than the other. He wasn't intentionally shaming us. Not one person got it right. He was pointedly demonstrating the power of just one element in the wine tasting experience: temperature." Now consider a test conducted at the suggestion of winery owner Robert Hodgson at the California State Fair Wine Competition. Essentially, the panels of 65 to 70 expert judges were given a huge variety of wines to rank as per usual. But what they were not told is that they were actually given each of the wines 3 times from the exact same bottle. After running this same experiment 4 consecutive years, what Hodgson found was that, to quote the paper published on the experiment, only about 10% of the judges were able to replicate their score within a single medal group. In fact, he even found 10% of the judges were so far off that they switched a bronze rating to a gold for the exact same wine from the exact same bottle. In another study conducted by Hodgson, an analysis of the concordance among 13 US wine competitions, it was found that in the vast majority of cases, receiving a gold medal at one wine competition had virtually no correlation to not just being ranked similarly at another competition, but in many cases that same wine scoring below average at other competitions. As to what's going on here, Hodgson sums up, "There are individual expert tasters with exceptional abilities sitting alone who have a good sense, but when you sit 100 wines in front of them, the task is beyond human ability." In yet another test, the one by Frenchman Frédéric Brochet in 2001, he found that simply changing the label of the same bottle of wine from an expensive, well-thought-of type to a cheap one resulted in the 57 taste testers almost universally changing their tune on not just how they liked it, but even various attributes about it. In another experiment, Brochet also gave a similar panel a glass of white wine and a glass of red wine and gave them a list of common words used to describe white and red wines and told them to assign them appropriately to the 2 wines in front of them. It turns out the red wine was actually the same as the white wine except dyed red. And only a small percentage of the tasters were able to accurately identify that both wines tasted the same in the descriptive words they chose to identify each wine with. And yes, contrary to what is almost universally stated, not all of the wine taste testers got it wrong. Nevertheless, most did. While you may try to argue that perhaps the results ended up being different because the dye had an effect on the flavor, beyond that it was purported to be flavorless dye, and we can be reasonably sure it didn't drastically alter the taste to jammy, spicy, and intense, among other common terms that wine professionals use to talk about red wines. That said, important to note here is that while Brochet's studies are often cited as definitively showing how bad wine experts are at judging wines, in this case that they can't even tell the difference between red and white wines, that's not what the study actually showed at all. Blindfold even amateur wine drinkers and legitimately give them a white and a red wine, and they are likely going to do extremely well at telling the difference, as anyone who's ever drunk wine could pretty much attest to. Rather, this test simply showed how easily our perception of things is influenced by suggestion. Just as importantly here, what literally every single source we could find not only leaves out when reporting this story, but in the vast majority of cases falsely states, is the actual qualifications of those being tested by Brochet. It turns out the people he was using as taste testers were not experts at all, simply undergraduate students studying enology, that's wine and winemaking. While certainly probably more knowledgeable than your average person on the street, nobody would call an undergraduate mathematics major just learning the ropes a maths expert, nor would their skills be indicative of what their professors who have vastly more experience and are actual experts are capable of doing. Thus, how expert any of these students were at the point in their education when given these tests isn't clear. What would be far more interesting and indicative is to give that same exact test to the world's master sommeliers and see how they did. Presumably because they still have monkey brains like the rest of us, they would still perform poorly, but nobody yet has run that test that we could find. However they would do it in such a scenario, what is undeniable is that study after study shows that our perception and expectation vastly influences our experiences, not just in wine tasting, but in pretty much every facet of life. As the master sommeliers demonstrate by passing the taste test they are subjected to in the first place, with enough time and study, there are actually people who are exceptionally good at identifying and judging attributes of wines in the right circumstances. But overwhelm their senses with 100 wines or change their expectations about what they are tasting, and their perceptions will change significantly, seemingly making them little better than a random person off the street at telling anything definitive about the wine. And then, when adding not just telling attributes about the wine, but also whether it is inexpensive to purchase or expensive, the whole thing is a bit of an effort in futility. In the end, a handcrafted table might cost a lot more than one that is mass-produced, but if they are made from more or less the same materials and the company mass-producing them hasn't chosen to cut any corners, the mass-produced and often vastly cheaper table will, in a lot of cases, actually be objectively better and certainly more consistently so, thanks to machined and automated precision. But that does not stop people from appreciating and enjoying their handcrafted table more than the same basic table purchased from IKEA. As with everything, you like what you like. Wine tasting is subjective, and what about a given type appeals to you is really all that matters. If knowing you paid $200 for that glass enhances your experience, fantastic. For others, buying bottles of $2 chuck so they can enjoy many glasses with a large group of friends at a party is going to be a more enjoyable experience. For others, attending wine events where various fancy wines are sampled and discussed more than makes them worth the extra cost and the trip. For yet others, sipping alone at home, the cheap wine that has had sugars added to it to make it a little sweeter might be their preferred cup of tea. As the old adage goes, the only thing that matters with regard to a wine is whether or not you like it. Whatever your preferences, just don't be a snob about it, whether a wine connoisseur or not. I think we can all agree that wine snobs are right up there with grammar Nazis. And look, I'm not a wine snob, but I'm a pretty big wine fan, and if it wasn't 10 in the morning right now, I would want to have a glass after doing this video. And like I say, I'm not a snob, but instead I would make sure that I'd gotten a bottle I like at a fair price through Bright Cellars. As I said at the start of this video, Bright Cellars give you a quiz. They send you a box of wine, and then you rank the wines in that box. Then each month they use that information to make the next month's wines better based on your feedback. Now, to my great disappointment, they couldn't send me any wines. I'd love to have them on my desk right now because I live in Europe, they're an American company, and there are apparently these things called laws which stop them sending me wine. It's very disappointing. But objectively, the wines they send out are great. I looked them up online, like the wine fan that I am. What else? Well, you can choose how much they send you, from my setting, which would be lots and lots, to, well, less frequent. It all depends on how much wine you drink. Look, if I was in the US, I would be all over this, so just take advantage of something I can't, dear American viewers, and get some great wine, and you'll also get 50% off your first box because, well, the only thing better than good wine is good wine at 50% off. Cool. brightcellars.com/brainfood. Just do it. Please go through our link as it really does support the show. Cheers. Thanks for watching.